I'm Lena van Tilburg for Biznews. African leaders, including President Cyril Ramaphosa, are in St. Petersburg in Russia for a second Russia-Africa summit. The last one was in 2019 in Sochi. It comes as President Vladimir Putin is increasingly turning to Africa in the face of its deepening isolation from the West over the invasion of Ukraine. And joining us is independent journalist and foreign policy specialist Peter Fabricius to discuss what Russian and African leaders are expecting to gain from this summit. Hi, Peter. Weren't you supposed to go to that summit?
Yeah, I was actually. As we sit now, I should be in St. Petersburg attending the summit because it's just started. Yeah, they gave me accreditation, and then a couple of days later they withdrew it. And I presume it's because they just don't like the Daily Maverick very much that I work for, and I'm sure the embassy in Pretoria intervened, actually.
Intervened to try to let you go?
No, intervened the Russian embassy.
Oh, the Russian embassy.
Blocked me go. Yeah.
But doesn't that invitation normally come from the presidency?
Oh, not from our presidency. No.
Oh, because I thought normally they would sort of facilitate journalists going. That's how it normally works.
Yeah, there's that question. So look, I mean, you see what this summit is. It's a summit of the leaders. Okay, they have their own private meeting. I guess it's going to be pretty much private. Well, that's what it was last time. And sort of at the same time and in the same place next door, there's this what is now called the Economic and Humanitarian Forum. And so there's lots of panel discussions in which some of the leaders participate, the presidents, but otherwise all kinds of other people, ministers and officials and NGOs and so on. And so the people who organized the conference, it's called Congress Foundation, they accredited people. So they accredited me last week, about 10 days ago, and then suddenly on Monday I was told, sorry, change the plan.
They don't like what you're writing me. So,
or what the Mavericks writing, or both, I guess, yeah.
So, well, you did attend the last summit, and then there was a lot of pledges from Putin about doubling trade to Africa to 40 billion. Did any of that materialize?
Doesn't seem very much, I mean, I guess he would blame COVID and the war and all that, but one way or another, it seems a bit of a disappointment. I mean, one would have to sit down and scientifically compare this with other similar summits with other countries that Africa has, as you know, with the EU and France and, Japan and US occasionally and so on, and compare on the delivery of promises. But I think this one is a bit disappointing, even comparatively.
Well, disappointing also because it seems that not many African heads of states are there, not the number that they were hoping to get.
Yeah, I'd be interesting to see what eventually happens. But even their own people said yesterday that they're only expecting about 17 or something. And the last time they had 43. And one gathered that Putin was hoping to kind of, exceed that. Given, last time, of course, he wasn't in full-blown war with Ukraine. He had already invaded Crimea, one would have to say, a few years before. But, that kind of seemed to be something that everyone was able somehow, except the Ukrainians, I guess, to sort of digest, But things then changed radically last year when he invaded the whole of Ukraine, or tried to. So,
what do you think Putin is trying to get from this summit?
I think you're right in your intro. I think he's basically trying to show that he's not isolated, as isolated as the West would like him to be and believes he is. And Africa, as you say, Africa's been quite ambivalent if you want to look at Africa as a continent. When it comes to those votes on the Security Council, in the General Assembly condemning Russia's invasion, slightly more African countries supported it than abstained, but still, in relative terms, quite a lot abstained. So it's a bit iffy, Russia, Africa, and that's why there's been a lot of diplomacy by Russia and the West on this continent since the invasion, because both sides are basically trying to, win over African support.
And what are the African leaders hoping to gain?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, there was a good piece written it was written in the Institute for Security Studies that we published to the Maverick last week, which basically reprimanded in a way Africa for not having a sort of orchestrated position, because it's not clear what they will try to achieve. It's not even very clear who will be there. And I mean, one thing they ought to be doing, apart from anything else, is demanding that Russia, reinstate this Black Sea grain initiative, which is allowing, Ukrainian grain to be exported from the country to reach markets, to reach Africa, basically to reach global markets, and therefore to sort of keep the prices down. But I don't know. We'll see. Maybe in the private discussions there will be some mention. I would hope that President Ramaphosa at least would, mention that, or not just mention it, but actually, try to get Putin to do something about it.
Well, Putin, apparently the Russians had a bumper crop of grain. Can they give people or the African countries the grain that they're looking for from Ukraine?
Yeah, look, I don't think that there's ever going to be an oversupply. I think there's definitely going to always be a shortage, and therefore that there's going to be higher prices than there ought to be. I mean, the more grain you have in the market, the prices are going to be and more affordable for everyone, including Africa, where the need is greatest. So yeah, there are definitely suggestions that Putin might try to actually unveil a kind of alternative plan at the summit, in order to, because he knows there has been criticism, might even be why some African leaders didn't attend, and so he's hoping to unveil a plan that would cut out Ukraine, which, one doesn't know what that means in effect. I mean, at its worst, it could mean like sort of transporting Ukrainian grain across land borders into Russia and then putting it on the market. It's a sinister kind of suggestion, I think.
But he's not going to give the grain. He's still going to.
Well, mostly, yeah. But he has said that, and he has said that he has already been, and I'm not sure if this has been borne out, but that's supplied to the poorest countries in Africa, some grain for free and fertilizer. That needs to be tested. I think that claim.
Do you think the African leaders will mention the influence of the Wagner group in Africa that seems to be, their profile seems to be rising in Africa?
I suspect not, because it's probably, too. I mean, I can't see our president raising it. When his minister was asked about this a couple of months ago, she said, "Oh, what about all the other, malevolent foreign influences on this continent?" So it didn't sound like they were going to, and yet to bring it up. And I mean, South Africa has been extremely reluctant to say anything that might offend Putin. They should, of course. But you see, I think what's happening here is that the sort of leaders you might raise are probably not attending the summit. People like Hakainde Hichilema, the Zambian president, apparently not going to be there. Even though he's part of that peace initiative, that Ramaphosa was part of, and which went to Ukraine and Russia last month. But I read somewhere, and one doesn't know until the conference has happened, that he's not going to be there.
Do you think the peace initiative that Ramaphosa and some African leaders initiated, that might be on the table?
Yes, it would. I'm sure that would be discussed. I mean, to what effect we'd have to see, because it sounded like they got a rather bad reception from Putin, which in a way was a good thing, actually, because it meant they were saying things that were quite critical and pertinent. And especially for Ramaphosa to say something. I mean, Ramaphosa, for example, basically said in accord with the other leaders that they should return the Ukrainian children, to Ukraine, which Putin obviously didn't like very much. And then they also brought up the question, which they do in sort of abstract terms in these situations, of respecting territorial integrity and sovereignty and so on, which is another way of saying, please get out of Ukraine, I suppose. And Putin didn't seem to like that very much either. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that initiative was entirely a good thing and entirely balanced, but they did raise one or two critical points. So I guess that might come up, yeah. I mean, Ramaphosa will be there, the Egyptian president, although he wasn't on the peace initiative. Egypt is supposed to be part of it, and others. Macky Sall and so on. So, yeah, I would imagine that it would come up.
So how do you think the West sees this? Because South Africa, on the one hand, is again trying to, tell the United States that, don't take us out of AGOA. How would it seem that President Ramaphosa will probably again be photographed right next to Putin. He always seems to land right next to Putin.
Yeah, in Sochi, he was on the one side and El-Sisi was on the other. What does that tell you?
Yeah.
Look, it won't go down well, and it is quite a precarious moment still, because they're in the process of reviewing, routinely reviewing the eligibility of African countries to participate in a go. There was a hearing on Tuesday, I think Tuesday this week, in which the South African government didn't seem to participate. Alan Windey, the DA Western Cape Premier, participated and strongly urged them not to drop South Africa from a go because the Western Cape benefits. And, but Patel, the trade minister, was there last week or the week before, making the same case. So, it's all these things add up. I haven't seen specific mention of South Africa's participation in that summit coming up as one of the things they object to the US. But it doesn't help.
Would the issue of children that the Russians basically kidnapped from Ukraine, does that ever come up in discussions, do you think, between people like Ramaphosa? I mean, we always said we favor human rights. So does that ever come up?
As I mentioned a moment ago, it seemed to come up, and I mean, in a way that no one could deny, what was being discussed, but it was rather abstractly referred to by Ramaphosa when they met Putin in St. Petersburg a couple of weeks ago. Whether it'll be, ironically to me at least, in that forum, the forum which they now called Economic and Humanitarian Forum. And it used to be just called the Economic Forum, and they added humanitarian, which some people would think was the height of irony. But the commissioner, his commissioner for children's rights, who's been indicted with him alongside Putin by the International Criminal Court, she's leading a discussion on the protection of children's rights. So, but you can see that in that discussion, no one's going to say, by the way, children have the right not to be forcibly, removed from their home country and transported to another one, which to me is actually ethnic cleansing. That's really what it's about. I mean, Putin defended it at that meeting with Ramaphosa and the other envoys in the peace mission, as saying, well, we're doing it to protect them. So, even if that were true, it's like, we're bombing and invading this country, so we're taking these children out to protect them from what we are doing, basically.
There's a lot of irony in as you said, this commission, humanitarian, all the words that they're using, and still the South African government insists there's nothing wrong with their cozying up to the Russians. With all. So how?
South Africa's position is so weird in a way. Ultimately, it just doesn't seem to be quite explicable. That's why a lot of people think there must be money involved. There is a Russian company that has a joint venture on manganese mining with the ANC's, enterprise arm, investment arm, Chancellor House. Does that, and so they definitely get money from that. They get donations as well as share of the profits. Is there more money that comes from Russia? We don't know. But South Africa does seem to have taken an absolute decision not to criticize Russia. That seems to be their policy. Don't offend Russia. I mean, they will try and justify it in a million other ways. Well, it doesn't really help to criticize Russia. It doesn't even help to mention that Russia's invaded Ukraine, and resolutions at the UN General Assembly that are not even related to the war directly. But even where the other BRICS countries actually voted for that resolution, which was actually about improving cooperation between the UN and the European Council, because it mentioned the Russian invasion, South Africa abstained. China supported it, India supported it, Brazil supported it, but South Africa still abstained. So it almost seems to be the policies do not criticize Russia. Yeah.
So what about the other South African in Russia, former President Zuma?
Wouldn't it be fun if he popped up at the summit? I somehow doubt it. But, he's either there because he's receiving, antidotes for whatever poisoning he thinks he's suffered, the same as David, Mabuza, the former deputy president, or as I think a lot of people suspect, he's just parking off in Russia to wait to hear whether he'll have to go back to jail, whether they'll decide, in fact, that the time he spent on that kind parole that Arthur Fraser gave him counts as prison time, and therefore he can avoid prison. That seems to be. I mean, how long does it take to get an antidote for poison? He's been there for weeks,
Yeah, well, England, they always presses that button, it seems, every time, the medical emergency button when, he actually has to go either back to prison or to court. Peter Fabricius, thank you so much. We also speak to you again because BRICS is also coming. Are there any new developments on the BRICS Summit?
I don't think so. I mean, the issue of Putin has been settled. He's not going to be there, which took some fairly adroit diplomacy, I think, from South Africa's side. And I mean, the big issue there is going to be, who joins. If they first of all accept the criteria for expanding it, the membership, and then specifically if they start to give some indication which members will join, and does it become a sort of, Russia support club? That's what I think is the concern.
Is Iran one of the ones in the running for new?
Well, it's applied. It's formally applied, Iran. There are a couple, like 12 or 13, or it might have gone up since then, countries like and the UAE and Saudi Arabia that have formally applied. And then there's some that they think are interested. And Iran is one of them, that's going to be another issue that's going to irritate, Western partners of South Africa if Iran joins.
Peter Fabricius, thank you so much for speaking to us.
Good.